When I was 36, I had an awakening experience in Paris after 3 years of intense meditation with a Hindu guru. And many things had prepared that awakening experience: childhood trauma, multiple shatterings, a great deal of study, plunging into the Buddhist tradition, the Sufi tradition, the Hindu tradition. And what that experience was that I saw the whole world from my Parisian bedroom vanish into white light and then reappear in white light, but soaked with that light. So I knew at that moment that everything is created out of light matter energy. And I knew, because I had read a lot of the different accounts of mystical transformation, that this was a tremendous initiation. And I fell on my knees and thanked God, and I thanked my teacher. But then a question rose. And this is the question that has driven my search. What is this kind of awakening for? I knew that it would change my life forever and my experience of life. And indeed it did, because ever since then I have been able to see that light whenever I needed to, and I have known that the world is absolutely saturated with divine presence and sacredness. But it seemed to me that it was very important to ask that question, because I was very well aware from a very early age that I was living in a terminal age of the world, that there was not only immense suffering, there's always been immense suffering, but also now immense danger to life itself on every level. And amidst all the joy and the celebration and the ecstasy that I felt, because I'd had a very traumatized childhood, I'd had a very disastrous set of very painful love affairs, I had suffered hugely on my quest, so to come to this was a huge, huge healing and joy. But during the next period, I just fell not into a depression, but into a deep, deep longing to find out what awakening is for in our time. And when you ask the presence for what you truly want, and when you ask it with your heart, mind, soul, and body, you get guided to those who can give you the answers. I had been friendly with the Dalai Lama for many years, and I had the honor of interviewing him on the day he won the Nobel Prize in Oslo. And we had a 2-hour interview. Can you imagine, on that day, which was such an amazing day, when a man of his spiritual genius got honored by the whole world, to be in Oslo at that time and having the privilege to sit with him for 2 hours that day and ask him any question that was on my heart and mind. I was so overwhelmed by his love and by the power of his presence that I couldn't get out of my chair. And His Holiness must be used to this kind of effect on people. After all, he's probably been doing this since he first began at the age of 4. So he started laughing. And he said, "Andrew, you have to go because I'm about to receive the Nobel Prize." So he went over to me, he grabbed me, and I found myself, heart, mind, body, and soul, against the Dalai Lama's chest. So I looked up at him at that moment. I said, "I will never be in this position again. So what is the meaning of life?" He roared with laughter because he knew the question that I was really asking. And then he withdrew and he said something which was the first great answer for me. And he said it very severely and very grandly. He said, "The meaning of life is to embody the transcendent. Not just to experience this amazing bliss and peace and joy, but to embody it, to bring it down into your mind so your mind is irradiated by it, to bring it into your heart so your heart is expanded by it, to bring it into the depths of your body so your body undergoes a change and transformation through it, and then to embody it in the way you live and serve and speak and love everyone. It's a marvelous answer. And it's an answer that goes far beyond any religious answer because it cuts right to the chase. But I still really wasn't satisfied. I'd got the key. He'd given me the key. And I worked in various ways for the next few years. I wrote, I traveled. And then I came to this place where I met the man who forever changed my life. And that man is, of course, the man whose spiritual genius soaks these stones and this dust, Father Bede Griffiths. Father Bede was not my guru. He was not my master. He was something very much more mysterious than that. He was my beloved. And I was his beloved. One of his beloveds. And we had, from the very first moment I met him, to make the film that you saw last night, an extraordinary, luminous, amazing, absolutely tender and absolutely boundaryless intimacy which forever expanded my idea of what love can be between two human beings. When the film ended, Father Bede had a terrible heart attack. And I was in Paris, I'd returned to Paris where I was living, and I immediately returned to India to be with him as he was dying. I had seen him in this glory and serenity and strength and majesty and peace, delivering really the essential secrets of his whole life, because the film is just a taste of the conversation that we had. It was later made into a book that's had a very large effect. And now I saw him shattered by heart attack, shattered by suffering. And for 3 weeks, I was one of the few people who were around him, sitting up all night with him, holding him, helping him to go to pee. And in that period, something which I will never ever be able to put into words happened. And that was that the love that was already so profound became an eternal love, because my heart just shattered seeing his suffering and realizing that the time for our great love would be on the earth so short. There were 3 things, 3 great holy gifts, apart from the ultimately holy gift of a transcendental love that Father Bede gave to me. The first was that he modeled in his way of being, in the way he spoke, in the way he addressed human beings, in the genius of his ability to work with each person in terms of their own individual nature. He modeled a true Christian life. And I had never seen a true, authentic, mystical, grounded Christian life with such intensity and beauty. And that healed me of my contempt for the churches and for their obvious betrayal of almost everything that Jesus stood for, and gave me a very deep sense that what I had been looking for as an answer to the question, what is awakening for, would be hidden in not Christianity, but in a vastly expanded vision of what Jesus really was and is. And it was on that vastly expanded version of truth, that vision of what really Jesus was and is, that Father Bede spent his whole life. The second thing that Father Bede gave me, because he was not only a mystic and a great spiritual leader, he was a clairvoyant prophet. He could tell things that were going to happen to you. He could read your past. He could read your mind. And he knew where we were. And on the last day of shooting, I was sitting in his hut with him, waiting for the rapscallion Australian crew to come. And Bede said to me, "You know, Andrew, this is the hour of God. This is the hour of God." And because I'm Oxford trained, and if you're Oxford trained, you ask snotty questions, I asked him, "What do you mean by the hour of God?" And he smiled because he'd been at Oxford, so he knew what particular game I was playing. And he said, "I'll tell you." He said, "Humanity has reached a point where it will either choose adoration and the sacred or die out." And I let that sink in. And then he said, "There are now only three options. There are three options left. The first option is that humanity will see the horror that's inflicted out of its vanity and hubris and greed on the world, on itself, on animals, on the whole bleeding, stricken planet. And it will fall on its knees and beg for transformation, and grace will descend, and the whole horrible story will be transformed. And that is totally unlikely. That's the first option. The second option is that humanity will continue in its devastating addiction to power and its narcissism and its total concentration on its own needs and die out in an orgy of greed and take the whole planet with it. And he said, there are days when that seems extremely likely. And then he smiled. And he said, "But the divine that I have met in the core of my heart is a divine of infinite love and infinite mercy and infinite concern for us and infinite desire for us to birth a new world." And so he said, there is a third option. This is not a pretty option, but it's a holy option. It's a beautiful option. He said that what he believed could very well happen is that we will go through communally and globally what he went through after his heart attack. A complete meltdown of our old identity. Our communal identity, our economic identity, our political identity. And of course you can see now, all these years later, that meltdown is very far gone already, and it is bound to continue because we've done nothing whatever serious to address the major problems that afflict us. But he said, and this is so important for the real hope ahead, he said, this will be what, on a global scale, what the dark night is on an individual scale for someone. This will be a death, but a death not into extinction potentially, but into a new kind of life. Humanity humbled by tragedy, humanity humbled by absolute disaster after disaster after disaster, humanity humbled by the collapse of all of its structures and isms and games, and reduced at last to asking for help. And therefore able to receive help from another dimension. And it's that map that I have lived my life by, because I knew when he said it that it was true. And every single thing that has happened has confirmed the truth of what he told me. The third gift, and this is a great mystery, and there'll be some amongst you for whom speaking of this mystery will make no sense. And I bow to you. I do not reject what you have to say, but I'm telling you this is what I learned from him. So one day it may come to be meaningful to you, and if it isn't, it doesn't matter. You're all wonderful, good people. There are two kinds of mystic teachers. One kind is the wisdom mystic teacher who helps people connect with their essential divine consciousness. And that is a very important kind of teacher, and there are very few of them, because in order to help people connect with their essential divine consciousness, you have to be in at least the fringes of divine consciousness yourself. Otherwise, nothing can happen, because you have to be resonating at a very deep level with the divine to be able to communicate the divine, because it's never communicated really in words, it's communicated by presence. The second kind of mystic teacher, and this is the one that Bede was, and this is the one kind that I am, is an evolutionary mystical teacher. Someone who truly believes that, because they've experienced it, that gaining deep access to divine consciousness is not the end of the path, but the means that the path gives you to evolve a different kind of human being. A human being like Jesus, who is fully human and fully divine, gifted with powers at a wholly new level that they can dedicate to the transformation of the planet. And now I'm coming to the third great gift that Bede gave me. What happened to Bede in his last years is something I think of supreme importance for the whole human race. Not just Christianity, but for the whole race. If you believe, as Aurobindo believed and knew, if you believe that Bede knew and believed the truth, if you believe that I'm not talking crazy rubbish to you, then what I'm going to say to you will be really accessible. What I'm saying to you is that this dark night is the birthing ground of a new embodied divine humanity who is going to be a quantum leap from where we are now and who we are now. This is the crisis that could potentially be the burning ground of all of the old fantasies and illusions and separations, and the birthing ground of a humanity united in a universal vision of love and wisdom, and capable of working with the divine directly, not only to transform itself and its institutions, but to heal nature and restore a wholly new planet on a wholly new level. It could also choose not to do that and commit mass suicide. The third great gift that Bede gave me is that he explained to me what had happened to him during the stroke. You heard the story, but you didn't hear the conclusion of the story because it was too much to put into the film. The first part was that he felt that he was going to die. He prepared himself for death, and suddenly he was overwhelmed with the passion of divine love that filled him, heart, mind, body, and soul, and just erupted like a volcano in him. And anybody who has ever had that amazing experience knows what that's like. It is like having volcanoes erupting, and you think you're going to die, but you're not dying, you're being flooded with a complete new energy. The divine light started to descend through his head and change in the way I described to you in the meditation we shared on the bus. Change his mind, change and expand his heart, open up again his sexuality, which had been shut down, but in a divine and tender and passionately beautiful way, and actually start to penetrate the very cells of his body. He had had all of the classic mystical experiences. He was the most achieved Christian mystic in the world. He knew I'd had many of them. And this one was something that he had never anticipated. The actual process of the transfiguration of the heart, mind, soul, and body. Now, one of the things you may not know, because it's been hidden, is that one of the essential streams of Christian mystical practice and manifestation of grace has been the transfiguration process. There have been Christian saints who have been transformed in heart, soul, mind, and body. The transfiguration of Jesus in Mount Tabor, the ultimate transfiguration of the dead body into the resurrection body, left a stream of power that can be connected with by the Christian mystic and was connected with by Bede, which recreates the resurrection body, the marriage of light and matter in a human body that is open to it. And this corresponds exactly to what Aurobindo discovered in his own search and was working on for the last 30 years of his life. And Bede tremendously revered Aurobindo because he understood that this process of transfiguration is the birthing ground of the next level of humanity. So what Bede gave to me was the fullness of Christ, the fullness of the Christ consciousness. Not Jesus as founder of a religion. Jesus is much, much more important than that. If he was just another founder of another religion which claimed another set of laws and dogmas for another fanatical purpose, we could forget about him. But Jesus was something very much more important than that. Jesus was a pioneer of this transfigured divine human being who could live a transfigured divine human life in a sacred cosmos and co-create with God a wholly new way of being and doing everything. He was like, if you like, the first fish who turned into a bird. You know that birds come from fish, so there must have been one fish that did the first mutation and became the bird. And what Bede showed me is that Jesus was that fish and made that shift and that change and that transformation, not on behalf of creating another religion, but on behalf of modeling a new kind of embodied divine life. And before I go on to describe what happened next, which was a massive revolution in my own heart mind and a really powerful answer from the Christ himself to my question, what is awakening for in this time? I just want to tell you a story about Bede's dying. This is an amazing story, and I don't tell it very often, but because I love you, I'm going to tell it to you. I didn't actually meet Bede in Shantivanam for the first time. I met him 2 years before in Big Sur in California, where he was giving a lecture. You can hardly call what he did a lecture, a manifestation, in the Camaldolese monastery. And I went with my buddy, and we sat and were completely overwhelmed by the beauty and the majesty of who he was and the extraordinary clarity with which he spoke. And when he died on May the 13th, I was in Big Sur again, staying with a great friend. And I couldn't sleep because of the grief. I'd watched him in terrible pain. The pain had lasted for 6 months. And here he was dead, this being whom I had only really just met, but with whom I had fallen totally and hopelessly and finally spiritually in love, and who had already completely transformed everything that I understood about reality, and now he was dead. And if you've ever loved somebody in the way of loving someone as holy, really revering them as holy, if you've ever had that experience, you will know that a love like that goes beyond any other kind of love. It is a love that has everything in it. It has the body in it, it has the heart in it, has the soul in it, but it has a divine intensity and a divine beauty and a divine sweetness that when it leaves, you feel as if the whole world, the whole universe has gone dark, because nothing anymore that you ever live on this earth could ever possibly be as beautiful as that love. Nothing. So beautiful, so complete, so total. That was what I was feeling. So I walked down to the sea at Big Sur at dawn, and I sat. The sun came up. A ray of light shot straight across the sea, lit me up. I heard Bede, literally, I heard him. And this is the only time I've had this experience, except in the experience I'm going to tell you later. And he was chuckling, and he said, "My God," he said, "you love drama." He said, "That's always been your particular Achilles heel." He knew me very, very well. And he said, "Do not be sad. I am an eternal ray of the eternal sun, and I will be with you and in you, not only for your life. I will always be with you and in you, because our love is beyond space and time." I heard those words as clear as I'm speaking now. And that, of course, changed everything. 8 months later, I was in Paris, and I was speaking with one of the world's great clairvoyants who'd been personally trained by Padre Pio, the great Catholic saint who received the stigmata and who had gifts of clairvoyance and who could do the most astounding things like fly and appear in different places. And all of this has been annotated by journalists. It happened in the 20th century in full view of everyone. And she'd been personally selected by him and was used by Interpol, by the police forces, by politicians to try and really help the world. She's an extraordinary person, a wild Romanian. And she said, "It's so funny, there's a man in orange robes walking around this room." This is my room in Paris. "And he's very old, and he's got a message for you." And I said, "Well, what?" She said, "I have no idea what this message means." And I said, "What is the message?" And the message was, what happened by the sea in Big Sur in California was more than illusion. Wow. But it's funny, because the film company, right, that made the film about his life was More Than Illusion Films. So Father Bede, or Bede as I really call him, Bede taught me the immortality of the soul in an English joke. Very low-key, perfect English joke. even after receiving this extraordinary transmission of the fullness of a new vision of Jesus as the pioneer of a new kind of embodied, passionately compassionate humanity, the question still remained. What is all of this for? I was being filled up, but nothing much was changing outside. In fact, the world was plunging deeper and deeper and deeper into madness and ignorance and chaos. So I went on asking Bede. After he left, I said, you have got to help me. I'm stuck in this crazy world with the wisdom you've given me. What am I going to do with this? Please, please help me. Help me see what I can contribute to this moment. In 1997, my father was dying in the place where I was born. And where I was born was about 120 kilometers down this road. So I met the father of my soul, the one who gave me this vision, this universal vision of Christ consciousness, on the road to the place where I was born. And then I went back to be with my beloved father when he was dying, and we had the most miraculous week. My father was a policeman. He was a very grounded person. He was an exceptional gentleman. He was deeply conservative. And I know that I gave him a lot of headaches, can you imagine? But he loved me deeply, and I adored him. And it was a week in which we said the most amazing things to each other. At the end of the week, it was a Sunday, and I went with my brother and my mother to a church where I'd been often as a child. It was called Christ the King in Coimbatore. And I immediately entered into an altered state. I'd been with my dying father all week. I'd been flayed alive by my grief for him. He'd been suffering terribly. But there'd been such joy between us that tremendous pain and tremendous joy coexisted. A wonderful priest got up and said, look, Jesus is not the mystical king of the world because of the miracles. They are wonderful. And Jesus isn't the mystical king of the world because of the wonderful things he said. They are wonderful. Jesus is the most heartbreaking and most amazing of all the teachers of humanity, this is the priest saying, because he really was prepared to die for humanity, to give absolutely everything, beyond everything, for others. He was prepared to be crucified, if necessary, to pour out the truth and the love that he knew humanity needed. That's why his love is so shattering. And that's why he's so heartbreaking. And that's why he's seared the soul of the world forever. You don't have to be a Christian to feel the majesty of the sacrifice and the beauty of Jesus. You just have to be a human being with an open heart, looking at this astounding being, prepared to do anything at all to get the truth through. And those words went through me like a sword. I realized something at that moment, beyond words. And I looked up at the statue of the resurrected Christ at the end of the church. And for 15 minutes it became alive. I was looking at him directly, resurrected in glory. And there was a golden stream of light from his heart to my heart that seemed to take a knife and just stab my heart open, so that a much smaller stream of golden light could come from my heart to his heart. And it was an ecstasy beyond anything I could possibly describe. I could see him as I can see you now. And the only thing that prevented me from saying anything was the fact that I was sitting next to my extremely disbelieving, very rich brother, who would have thought if I'd said anything, I was even crazier than he already thought me to be. That was the definitive experience of my life, but it is not over, because I needed the answer to my question. I went out of the church utterly blasted by divine love, overwhelmed by the ecstatic presence, this golden power, this electrical, gorgeous, lava-like flow of infinitely passionate energy that is divine love. And many of you have experienced this and you know what I'm speaking of. It's an overwhelming experience. Orgasm is a beautiful experience, but if you can imagine 1,000 orgasms in every part of your body, you get close to what it's actually like being possessed by God in that way. I came out and I saw the most beautiful young man I've ever seen in his 23, 24. He was in a puddle and he had no arms and no legs. And he had just a filthy, dirty rag around him. And he looked completely despairing and broken and shattered beyond belief. And nobody was around, just me and him staring at me with these eyes that were the eyes of India, the eyes of the old women you see begging for an evening meal in the temples, the eyes of the lepers, the eyes of the people who sleep under bridges in winter, the eyes of the people you'll meet in the slums, mothers who can't afford the medicine for their children for the night, those eyes. The eyes of absolute tragedy and profound pain. And I looked into his eyes, and again, I knew I was looking at Jesus. I knew that I'd seen him in glory, and now I was seeing him broken, as he must have been on that cross, and as he is being crucified in all of us. And then I heard a voice. And it wasn't a kind voice. It was exactly the voice I needed. And this is what he said. You have been playing with your mystical experiences. You've been playing with light. You've used them to become famous, to write great books, to do all the rest of it. But this is not the way. It's not about acquiring sacred experience. Look into the eyes of this man, and you will see in those eyes 2 billion people who are living on less than $1.50 a day. You will see the animals being exterminated. You will see the forests burning. You will see the seas being polluted. You are not here just to rejoice in mystical illumination. You are here to put what you get from God into living, powerful, immediate, effective action, because otherwise the world will die. And then he said, the question, Andrew, that you're going to be asked when you cross the river at the end of this experience is not how many books you wrote, and not how many people you enchanted, and not whether you won the Nobel Prize, and not whether you had 423 wonderful mystical experiences. The only question that you are going to be asked, because you've been given so much, the only question that you're going to be asked is, what did you do while the world was burning? What did you do? while the world was burning. What did you do? And you can imagine that was quite a difficult morning. But I realized that I had my answer. And the answer is, we pursue deepest and highest divine awakening to become strong enough and fearless enough and grounded enough and infused by divine wisdom enough so as to turn up as soldier, lover, midwives of a new reality in sacred activism. Because what else could we possibly do at this moment when everything is at stake except wake up to what needs to be done and try and do it in the divine way of peace and compassion, but great clarity and the profoundest wisdom that we are capable of. If humanity can't wake up and act in this way, it will die out, because all solutions now from a lesser consciousness are just not going to work. You don't treat terminal leukemia with aspirin. So that was Bede's gift to me, that vision of the Christ, which brought together everything I'd learned in Buddhism, in Sufism, in Hinduism, and everything I'd learned from Bede, and focused it on a universal message for humanity about the need to connect at the deepest level with sacred consciousness. Whichever door you take, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how you get to it, but get to it soon, because the terrible days are coming. They're soon. They're soon. The world is going to go into a massive convulsion in the next 5 years. And we don't know what's going to happen. Everything is going to be shattered and peeled. And if you're not connected at those deepest levels, you're going to have your head swiveling like Sybil in The Exorcist. You just won't know what world you're in. But if you can get, in your own way, it doesn't have to be anybody else's way, but in your own way, in touch with the serenity and strength of divine consciousness, you'll find that if you use that to truly help in whatever way is natural to you, some are artists, some are psychotherapists, some are policemen, some are marvelous therapists of the body. If you use that totally down home, totally real sacred consciousness as a way of infusing yourself with more peace, more passion, more truth, the terror of what's coming will not drive you mad. It will in fact make you more authentic and more a servant of divine truth in reality. So I'm going to end by just giving you a very simple map of what sacred activism is. Sacred activism is the marriage of the deepest spiritual consciousness with the most focused, wise, urgent action. Just as Jesus married East and West in himself, so Jesus married the deepest spiritual imaginable consciousness with radical action on every level and modeled that for us. He's the supreme sacred activist of history. There are 5 kinds of service that you and I now need to bring together in the core of our lives. And we all can, and they're not rocket science. They just need to be made conscious. The first is service to the sacred. And it doesn't matter what name you call God or what name you don't call God, or whether you think God is real or not, or whether you're in your bloody head and are still thinking about all of these things. There is a presence here. You all know there is. You felt it. You know that there is an intelligence far beyond ours governing and dealing with all of this. Get into contact with it. Serve it by prayer, by thanksgiving, simple practices that suit you. But get on with it, because the time are shortening. The second kind of service is service to yourself. We all in this room need radical healing. I need radical healing. And I'm going through tremendous inner healings. Here with Tom, with my great friend, many kinds of healings, because I know I need them, but you need them. And it's time to put yourself in the way of radical healing, because people like you are going to be so needed. So you need to be as whole as you possibly can be when things get really rough. There are 5 kinds of practice that you can bring together. Try cool practices to calm you down, whatever they are, walking, being in nature. Use them. Hot practices that heat you up, that make you vibrant with love. And there are many great practices from all the traditions you can use. Prayer practice. Never forget that you can talk directly to God. You don't have to be sober. You don't have to even believe totally. Just start up the conversation. Have a conversation. See what happens. It's amazing what happens. Then physical practice. Try and find a sacred physical practice like yoga or like Reiki or like sacred dance, so that you can experience the divine energies in your body, and so that you can start marrying heart, mind, soul and body, because a true sacred activist will have to be so strong for the great work ahead. And then, of course, shadow work, because if you're not working on your shadow all the time, you're going to become dangerously narcissistic and inflated. Because this is an age which says basically to everybody, do what the hell you want. There are no consequences. Are you kidding? The world's dying. Most people are terminally miserable, half crazy. Hardly any relationships are working. Look around. Who is truly happy? And that's because the shadow is now having an orgy. People really do believe that they are the centers of the world, can do what the hell they want whenever they want. And that's madness. The third kind of service is service to all other beings. And that means all beings regarded as sacred, all beings treated with respect, and especially animals. Because if you haven't woken up to this, you haven't woken up to anything real in the world. And that is that we are now the Gauleiters of an immense concentration camp in which the animals are being tortured to death. We are the Gauleiters of a worldwide Auschwitz, which is torturing to death the animal race. And if we don't respond to that horrendous suffering and do something about it, the bad karma that we have stored up will destroy us in a huge black flood, because the mother isn't just the mother of the humans, she's the mother of the whole race, and we are now dangerously close to engineering our own destruction, not just by the cruelty, not just by the horrible games of power that we're doing, but by the incredible cruelty that we're doing with each other, and especially against the animal race. So that third form of service, including the animals, is incredibly important. The fourth kind of service is service to your local community with this deep knowledge. Think global, serve local. And if you want to find out what to do, ask yourself the question, what breaks my heart the most? That will show you. If you get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and surround yourself by the peace of God and ask that question, what breaks my heart the most about what's going on? Your ego will say, oh, well, I'm so heartbroken about so many things, I don't know what to choose. Well, that's pretty convenient, isn't it, right? So you go on for another bit, and then you really ask that question. And I'll tell you one good sign as to how to discover what breaks your heart the most. It's something you hardly dare even think about. It's something that when you start to read about it, you immediately try and turn the newspaper page because you just can't stand it. For some people, it's child prostitution. For others, it's the selling of women in Cambodia who are infected with AIDS by the age of 17 or 18. To others, it's the appalling way we treat the old. To the others, it's the way in which, in many countries, homosexuals are still sentenced to death. Find your heartbreak, you find your mission, find your energy to keep going on. The fifth kind of service is service to this birth, this potential birth that Bede talked about, that Aurobindo talked about, this great evolutionary possibility. And that means really getting wise about how you act emotionally, sexually, how you really treat people. Is your emotional life truly respectful and loving? Is your sexual life truly respectful and loving? It can be very wild, but is it truly respectful and loving? Do you really care about the people? Are you really honoring the people that you share your sexual life with? Are you really honoring the laws of nature when you vote for crazy people who don't believe in climate change? So all of your choices, if you're really taking this seriously, emotional, spiritual, political, economic, need to be brought together. Not in a moral way, because this is not about morality, but in a way that you ask yourself, is this choice truly loving, and is it truly serving my transformation, the transformation of other people, and this great transformation that's trying to take place? That's a very tough question to ask yourself, because it really brings you up against yourself, and it demands a lot of self-knowledge. But if you keep asking it, you'll be given enormous guidance. So I just want to end by saying thank you so, so much. I hope you will use the amazing beauty that you've been given in South India and in all of these different aspects. I hope you use the vision of Aurobindo and the grace of Bede Griffiths, this great evolutionary mystics. And I'll hope you take the challenge in your own unique, beautiful, holy ways of turning up as your full human, full divine self in the greatest imaginable battle where we've now come to, the battle for the future of humanity. Let's go for it. Joy awaits those mad enough to take up this challenge.